topic again is a very, very interesting one. It's evolution, how the concepts of work, value, and talents are changing in the 2020s. And it's going to be presented by, again, a very dear friend of mine, Gyan Nagpal, who I've known for years. In fact, we had met at a conference back then. It was a physical conference. And he was talking about talent economics, which then went on to become bestseller in the Amazon list on how to manage talent, and this was back in the early 2010s. And now your second book is out, Future Ready Organization, and I'm sure that some of the material that you're sharing today is going to be from that. I've read the book. This is very, very insightful, and especially in today's rapidly changing world, the whole concept couldn't be more relevant than ever in the past. So with that, welcome, Gyan. I'm going to just start sharing my screen, so maybe we can start with a brief introduction.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Anirvan. Thank you, Simeon, Devyani, everyone else for setting this up and for briefing me, making sure that I could join you all today. Now, I have 30 minutes, so the intent is to speak for about 15 or 20, present a couple of case studies, keep it practical, but also spend some time in the Q&A. And I think that's what's really exciting, is to get a few questions and then try and respond to it. So can I encourage you to use the chat as I'm presenting the early part of this presentation? Just use the chat, put in your thoughts, put in your questions, and we try and get to them towards the end. So let's get going on, Irvan. Can we move to the next slide, just to set up, where I come from and what I will be sharing. No, yes. The next one, please. Yes. Okay. So, folks, as Anirvan said, I basically what I want to talk about comes from two books that I wrote over the last 10, 11 years. Talent Economics was written in 2010 to 2012. It was still in the peak of globalization. We hadn't sort of seen the digital economy mature to the level that it has today. And of course, the pandemic has only pushed the maturity of digital commerce and digital as the default choice across industry segments. So talent economics was for a physical industrial world. The Future Ready organization is much more tuned to the digital world and what we're going to start seeing over this decade. So hence I'm talking about 2020 to 2030 decade, and what we're going to see in terms of capability, talent, jobs, and so on and so forth. And I'll present a couple of hypotheses from the book, not too much, and that should get us started in some valuable Q&A. So if we go to the next slide, it sort of covers the 5 shifts in how we find and organize capability. And you'll see that, we sort of disaggregated the economics of capability, the economics of talent, of the people side of business, and how we organize people within a business through 5 lenses, ability, access, accountability, affiliation, and architecture. And what we are seeing, particularly from the late 1990s to today, is that there is a trend line in each of these 5 perspectives. So under ability, you'll see static. That was essentially the industrial world, where we looked at organizations as pyramids, and we're entering a world where organizations are much more social and dynamic. So on and so forth. So you can read this in the same way. We're going from an employment architecture, a capability architecture that was static, localized. Think of how you found people before the internet. It was basically based on newspaper ads, and newspapers get distributed in neighborhoods and in cities. So you could never access talent quite easily outside of your city because they never knew you had a job. To a world we live in today where, via LinkedIn, you can find anyone across the world with capability and so on and so forth. So it's gone from localized, the access to capability has gone from localized to dispersed. Accountability has gone from hierarchical to much more democratized relationships like manager and teams.
Hey, Gyan,
Affiliation
there
gone from
is there
constant
is
to detached. Yes.
Gyan, there is a bit of an audio disturbance coming from your end.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Now it seems to be. Are you using external mic or?
No, I'm speaking to my laptop like we did in the test.
Oh
Want me
yeah.
to do
Okay.
something
So
different?
no, no, this is okay. Yeah.
This is better. Okay, I apologize. So, the short story, if you didn't get it, is 5 ways that we organize capability are all shifting. I was on accountability, the pyramid, highly hierarchical, becoming democratized. Affiliation going from constant to detached. Constant was 30-year careers. You joined, after school or college, and you retired essentially with a pension. That's gone. It's now much more of a talent marketplace, and relationships are much more short term. And then the architecture, the fundamental architecture of business has gone from composite, brick, almost fiefdoms of capability owned by different business leaders trying to collaborate across silos and other restrictive boundaries, to being much more disaggregated. Uh, and this is the one that we're going to pick up in on the next slide, where I present the core framework from the Future Ready organization, the dynamic capability framework. So Anirban, if we can move on to the next slide. Uh, the dynamic capability spectrum that we talk about in FRO, in this 3-year research project that I did from 2016, late 2016 to 2019, when the book released, essentially looks at the way modern business accesses capability. Now, in the old days, you essentially, built talent. So you hired young talent and they stayed with you, and that was basically a build model. And then with the war for talent, it became a buy and a build model. And what we've seen with freelance talent what I call the human cloud, the contingent capability that surrounds industries today with very, very high quality, high value, project based talent that is available. 250 million digital freelancers, by some estimates, are gigging across the world today. Uh, so you can now buy, build, or borrow capability as part of your strategic talent decisions. And then we've also seen the explosion of business to business relationships, such as outsourcing, such as strategic partnerships, as a key capability play in order to grow business. So, what we did in this book is organized human capability uh, through 9 sources of availability. Uh, at your on your extreme left of this slide, if you're seeing it the way I do, you've got the internal structure, which is a remnant of the headcount that organizations have traditionally employed. However, in the future, we believe that we don't need maybe more than 20 or 30% of our capability to be internal, and that's a very loose average. So in some industries it could be as low as 10, in other industries it could be as high as 50 or 60%. But it's a lot less than we've traditionally had, and there are reasons for it, and I'll speak about those reasons in a moment. But the way we look at talent also needs to change. Uh, so, we present strategic talent almost like balance sheet talent, talent that holds key relationships, key IP, and is absolutely critical, almost like an asset for the organization. Cohort of managers that basically manage the whole, and they're much more fungible, they're much more project oriented and agile in orientation than the old managers who were quite entrenched. They liked their functions and they owned their functions and they built walls around their functions. Supporting this internal structure, if you sort of look at it as a nucleus, around this internal structure, you have the external structure, which is basically the human cloud, 250 million uh, potential gig workers organized through a variety of different channels. So you've got agencies which are high quality, sort of high hourly rate contingent labor. Think of a lawyer. Think of any senior specialist that you may need from time to time, but on a contingent basis. That would come through an agency model, and then the marketplaces are the freelance marketplaces that we see exploding the top towels, tongas, hacker ranks, um, you know, Fivers, and the several other freelance marketplaces that you can go and hire a person for sometimes as low as $10 an hour to do a little bit of work, and they have a huge spectrum too. So through these marketplaces, you can even access SMEs, small organizations with 30, 40, 50 developers that have broad capability. I can work with you for weeks and months based on the complexity of your project. And then the last blue bar is crowdsourcing, which is micro-tasking. It's the Uber, Amazon, Turk kind of capability model. The micro-task is essentially defined as any body of work that can be contracted, completed, and paid within 4 hours. So think of your typical Uber driver or a food delivery arrangement. That's where the crowdsourcing economic model of capability has come alive, and it's totally digitally intermediated. It's totally managed through AI, and then supporting the internal structure and the human cloud is the network structure, which is essentially B2B arrangements. And under B2B arrangements, there are three very popular capability plays. The first one is capital invested. So it's joint ventures, mergers, acquisitions, anywhere where you deploy a little bit of your balance sheet in order to tie in uh, capability. And this has been very popular as a growth strategy, especially in new markets by companies looking to globalize. Better to go into a JV with a local player or whatever. It's also been a very, very popular way of incubating new ideas through mergers, acquisitions, and those strategies. The second pillar is strategic partnerships, which is basically no capital deployed. Now, these are two organizations coming together for win-win outcomes. It's Steve Jobs and his reseller network as a case in point, or it's any two co-branded relationships that are trying to work with complementary product. And then the final purple bar right at the end is outsourcing, which has sort of exploded in the last 30 or 35 years, ever since digital infrastructure could permit telephony and then internet-based outsourcing of tasks. And outsourcing has become a very, very popular, uh, you know, strategy in the B2B or the network architecture. Now, at this stage, this is nothing but a framework, right? All of this is quite well known. Nothing that I've said is brand new. There's no new capability. What is quite dramatic is when you apply this framework. Remember, a framework is nothing but a simplification of reality. It's just a lens through which you can look at the world and try and understand it. So the framework in itself isn't important. It's in its application that one gains insight. And in FRO, what we were able to do was profile how 16 companies build a talent recipe, a specific talent recipe from these 9 sources. So think of them as 9 ingredients, and there are ways and means you can construct the capability model of your business based on your ambitions, your footprint, your product, your customers from these 9 sources. And remember, all 9 are human capabilities, ways that you can access human talent. So if you go to the next slide, Anirvan, I've got one industry case study in there, which looks at how this is a banking case study. It's financial services, and what you'll see is across those 9 pillars, 3 competitors in the same industry today have 3 dramatically different capability models. And what we see right at the bottom, the brown and red spectrum heavy example right at the bottom is a traditional bank. This bank had been around for 70 years, and we went in and we profiled how how do they spend money, what kind of headcount do they have in the various pillars, and so on. And we established this recipe and took it back to their board for review. So you look at the red heavy spectrum, 70% of their capability is internal. It's headcount. They have 60, 70,000 employees. It's a very popular model across industries. A lot of traditional companies that grew up in the industrial economy look like this. Very, very common. And then you've got outsourcing, which is right at the extreme right, which has been very popular as a cost play across many traditional companies. Let's just take some of our transaction work and get someone else to do it. So that's been the two-pronged strategy that traditional firms have employed. Now, the organization in the middle that looks slightly different is an internet era bank. And they're very interesting. They didn't invest in an ATM network. They didn't invest in branches. They basically, started with digital banking. They have a very, very robust online platform, great incentives if you don't use traditional banking channels. It makes it quite compelling for the customer to just use online banking and transfers and so on. But they also have shared ATM networks and so on, which make at least access comparable to a traditional bank. But they're not investing brick and mortar ATMs in different places. They pay an access fee even to their competitors and so on. And you'll spot this in every country, the digital era internet bank. And then the one right at the top is a disruptive fintech company. It's a company that is now, I think, 11. I mean, when I wrote it was 9 years old, but now 11 years old. However, they've exploded in the last 3 or 4 years, reached a unicorn valuation, $1 billion in valuation with only 300 permanent employees. And they spend a variety of their energies. They're straight to cloud. They're disruptive. They're an aggregator. So they're working with a number of different strategic partnerships to enable access to customers and getting banking products from a variety of different sources to them. Now, the reason why this is quite dramatic is because if you look at the cost architecture of business in a traditional company, sometimes 30, 40, 50% of cost in services industry would be manpower. You add on outsourcing expenses and so on, and 60, 70% at times of service costs are human capability. And then you look at the competitor coming in at the top that is now able to deliver similar services at perhaps 1/10 the transaction cost. How do you compete anymore? It isn't about Nike and Adidas trying to sell shoes with a $2 or $7, manufacturing cost difference. Someone's in China, someone's in Vietnam. It costs a little different. This is dramatic. This is fundamentally disruptive. And if the traditional organizations don't evolve, then just their cost architectures and the way they imagine their capability and the way they like to manage their capability, normally 40 or 50, 60-year-old senior managers that have grown up with a particular mindset cannot imagine the same products being delivered to the same customers radically differently. But those young competitors that don't have this baggage can. So this is, in many ways, the compelling argument to look at capability through an integrated lens. Three broad lenses: the internal, external, and network. 9 sources of capability within that lens, and discover your talent architecture in business. Now, from a talent perspective, we're talking about careers and stuff. What this basically means is you don't need to look for employment anymore. Some of the smartest talent today is in looking for jobs. And if organizations don't respond, then the other double whammy that the traditional organization will face if they don't make their employment models and structures much more robust, the double whammy they face is that these kinds of old-fashioned 40 hours a week, time for money constructs around capability will end up only attracting B and C quality talent. The A quality talent doesn't want to sign up to 30 years, 40 hours a week, the same Groundhog Day experience, go clock in, get your coffee, sit down, answer email to lunch or whatever kind of reality. They don't want to spend their life and hit the grave doing just that. And as a result, only the perhaps B and C quality talent really get attracted to these kinds of jobs. So we have to disrupt the fundamental value proposition of work, both for internal talent, external talent, and for network relationships and how we work in B2B arrangements. Let's go to the next story, and then we can take Q&A. And please put in any questions you have into the chat. So the other perspective, the other question I keep getting in industry forums, or when I talk about careers and stuff, is what's going to happen to jobs, right? Particularly on AI. Yeah, we spoke about human capability. We saw how it's changing, and how organizations are using it differently. What would happen to the very construct of a job or work? Will we have jobs? I get asked this question a lot. So I think let's put it on the table and process it together. So if you go to the next one, Anirvan, broadly, I'm no expert on AI. So if you want to answer the question, will jobs survive? I look to experts, and I'm relying on the words of one of the greatest economists of our age, who said the following. Right, this person is a macroeconomist guru, understands how global economics are evolving, and he said, "We are all afflicted by a new disease called technological unemployment. Technology taking away work from people." And this is a very, very common thread. You see Elon Musk, he's worried about AI coming in, killing people, and so on and so forth. Others are less antagonistic, or sort of more optimistic about what AI can do. But this quote, funnily enough, is 90 years old. It was in 1930, and it's attributed to the godfather of macroeconomics, John Maynard Keynes, who said this after the Great Depression in 1929. And the reason I'm showing this to you is because this isn't a new argument. They've been doomsday predictions from the first assembly line, when Henry Ford put up his first assembly line in 1915. Every wave of technology coming in has in some way disrupted work, correct? But the reality is that you've got to start looking at it slightly differently. So if we go to the next slide, this is a headline from just after the Great Depression, where Anirvan, if you go to the next slide, please, if you don't mind. There's a graphic from the Great Depression which says, "Look, jobs are never coming back. March of the machines makes idle hands." This is 1929. And in reality, since then, we've seen human productivity rise by a factor of 6. So the modern worker is 6 times more productive in economic terms compared to the worker in the 1930s. And that's quite dramatic. One person doing 6 people's work, essentially, from an output perspective. And we're not even talking about innovation. We're just talking about productivity. So I prefer a viewpoint on the next slide. If you go there, I prefer a viewpoint which is a little more modern. And this is a research that was done pretty recently by 2 economists, one from MIT and one from Yale. Darren Akemoglu was the lead, exceptional writer, exceptional researcher. Wrote this book, or this research paper, on what's happening between jobs and machines. And he basically studied, along with his research assistant, Pasquale Restrepo, who's now working for Darren and MIT. They're both at MIT. What they did was they looked at 330 professions across the United States and saw the job titles in all the job ads over the last 30 years and how they had moved. And what they found was that some jobs were increasing and other jobs were decreasing and perhaps even going away. Of their 330 job families that they studied, there was only one job that had become obsolete in 30 years. No one was hiring for that job anymore. And that job in the US was a lift operator, an elevator operator, because you don't need them anymore. No one's going to pay $25,000 a year for someone to just punch buttons in a modern safety lift, fully automated. So that job had gone away. The others had changed. Some had decreased dramatically. Some had increased dramatically. And what they found was a very, very curious correlation. In jobs that were increasing, there was great job innovation happening. So they weren't called the same titles. They weren't, the expectations of the job description didn't look the same. Every 4, 5, 6 years, the job itself was evolving. and changing, and the skills required were changing ever so much to keep it in constant motion. Jobs that did not change invariably declined because you don't need those same specific skills in the same recipe anymore. And what they wrote in their research report, and I've got this quote here from which I really love, and it says, this tension that we have between machines and people is characterized by a race between two technological forces: automation on the side of machines, and the creation of new complex tasks on the side of man. While automation is an ongoing process which all else equal takes jobs away from labor, the creation of new complex tasks is also an ongoing process which adds new jobs to labor. Now, what is the most important word here? If you put it in the chat for me, let's see who gets it. In this paragraph, there is one word which is uh, more equal than the others. It's the most important one. Um, Anyone who can take a guess. I don't know how the audio works, but if you can, use the chat perhaps, or if you can speak, tell me which one do you think is the most important word here. Thank you, Venkatesh. It's not automation. Automation is probably the most important word to the machines. But to man, there's another word that makes us much more powerful. Okay, I'm going to give it. I can't keep waiting. I don't know how long it'll take. Not creation. Thank you for that, Eric. It's complex. The word is complex. And I want to spend a minute on this just to drill this down further. So there are several case studies from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s where a shift in technology almost decimated an earlier capability system. One of the famous ones is around horses and the motor car or the railroad, and how horses were no longer in demand. They moved. They went from being the default mode of transportation and goods and so on and so forth to being virtually obsolete in about 30 years. Uh, and a lot of economists at the time kept writing that, just like horses were no longer needed, man will also no longer be required, or women will no longer be required, humankind will no longer be required for work. And that is absolutely wrong, because people have what horses don't, and which is an intellect that can innovate the work itself. Whenever technology disrupts human capability, human capability has the ability to re-look at their contribution above machines and come back. And in fact, in some ways, use the new capability automation provides to exponentially enhance their productivity and value. So let me tell you a story of how this plays out in the modern age, and it's a very compelling story, very powerful story of how it happens. In 1979, when Apple started putting out their first Macintosh and Apple One computers and stuff, they had a few softwares being developed that could be used by these geeks who were buying these brand new computers at the time. And one of the most popular softwares out there was called VisiCalc. It was a spreadsheet. It was the first spreadsheet that was ever created. It was basically, like Excel today, a set of boxes that you could put some formula into and use to calculate. Now, the moment VisiCalc came out in 1979, holy cow, it fundamentally changed the way you could deal with numbers. And then you had, in 1983, the second and much more popular software called Lotus 123 being released. And then when you had VisiCalc and Lotus 123, the predictive view in the early 1980s was that you would never need another accountant or bookkeeper in 20 years. It was a doomsday scenario, because in the old days, an accountant would have a ledger and a journal, and would make a manual entry on the debit and credit side and reconcile. And if you needed to figure out what your balance sheet was, it would take a week to create a trial balance, and then you start using it. That was the old accounting, the manual accounting technique. You never knew what your cash balance was. You never knew where the error was. You never knew where a decimal had been missed. But a software was auditable. And if you put your accounts on a software, at a click of a button, you could get your balance sheet positions, you could get your P&L positions, you could reconcile and discover any errors. So people said, this is a free software. Why would you ever need a human being doing a bookkeeping job or an accountant's job ever again. This thing does it for you in seconds compared to weeks. That's the delta, and it does it for free compared to people who are expensive. Uh, and in reality, if we look at the evidence, the beauty of this story is it's computer, it's digital, and it's played out in our lifetimes and in our work careers for many of us. So we can really analyze it. And Wall Street Journal did a case study on what happened after Lotus 123 in 1983, and then particularly Microsoft Excel in 1987. When Excel released, this had almost reached a crescendo. But there's been evidence of what happened to the job for bookkeepers and so on and so forth since then. And if you go to the next slide, I've put the graphic from the Wall Street Journal, feature, an excellent article to read. And what they said was that they had done a 30-year-old piece called the Spreadsheet Apocalypse. What was going to happen to spreadsheets? And what they found was that, yes, indeed, jobs for bookkeepers, accountants, and audit clerks did decline. Quite exponentially. They came down to almost half of the numbers needed. Now, remember, in this 30 or 40-year period, business has grown from, it's a $7 trillion global economy to a 75 or $80 trillion global economy. So the amount of money in our system has grown 10 times. But the number of people you need is half doing bookkeeping, accounting, and audit because software does it for you. And that's the traditional argument around machines taking work away. However, what they also found is that the new capabilities spreadsheets gave intelligent talent suddenly gave rise to a whole new type of job. You know, the forensic auditor, the management analyst, the stock analyst, the stockbroker, suddenly they were delivering value on steroids because now they didn't have to keep a ledger and you didn't have a stockbroker trying to analyze an industry over 30 years and studying every manager and every result. You suddenly had a spreadsheet that could crunch 100 companies, 200 companies together and start using the early algorithms to tell you what's working, and it required human intelligence to do that. So spreadsheets actually enabled human capability to rise above the mundane, the rhythmic, algorithmic, repetitive, mundane tasks that human capability was stuck in, and start delivering value at a whole, or start imagining value at a whole new level by coming up with new complex tasks that mankind would do. Now, there's one last point that I'd make on this before we open it up for Q&A, which is, you see, the problem with work today is that we still cling to the very industrial construct around jobs. And in the industrial age, jobs were essentially an exchange of time for money. You gave up 40 hours a week and you received a monthly salary and a quarterly incentive and an annual bonus. And every construct around work was conceptualized as a function of time. 8 to 5, you come in at 8 o'clock, you go at 5, you get an hour off lunch or whatever. And as a result, when you bring in new complex tasks, right, what happens to the job descriptions? Now, the concept of a job description, which came with the time for money, it was an enabler of the time for money relationship, the economic contract of time for money. The concept of the job description was to fill an 8-hour workday. I need a set of tasks that can constitute one headcount or one person turning up every day and kept busy, and so on. But when you have new complex tasks, you've got to strip away all the nice to have stuff. So jobs in the future will really focus on one or two core deliverables. And the construct of of time and job descriptions and stuff have to be abandoned. People have to be paid for impact. In the old world, it was an exchange of time for money. In the new world, it is a value exchange. You create value, discernible, unquestioned value, and you receive some of that value in exchange. And it could be in long-term stock, it could be in short-term salary or whatever else. And that's the way the smartest talent is looking at work. Many times we question young interns working for free, but actually a few are getting exploited, but the smart ones are actually working for free for the right people, because the value they get in exchange at that time is exponential learning and exponential economic, sort of capabilities that they can then monetize later. The not so smart ones are doing it for free and learning very little in return. But you'll already start seeing the economic equation shifting towards a value exchange, at all levels of the employment hierarchy. And the construct of a job, the construct of a job description changing. I'll go to the last slide, which is basically a summary of all the capabilities put together in FRO. Anirvan, on the next page, if you don't mind. We have the 10 sources of future capability. 9 are human, and the 10th is AI, machine intelligence, which is actively disrupting 5, at least 5. There's no sure way to say this, but this is my hypothesis after 3 years of immersion in the subject. At least 5 of the 9 current sources and future sources will get disrupted and reshaped by AI. Others less so. But we will see a whole new equation, a whole new talent recipe emerge, a whole new way of looking at careers, of work, ways to monetize capability, platforms on which that capability can reside and get amplified. And we need smart talent to start experimenting and building this new career model for themselves around their core skills and their core ambitions. I'm going to stop there. We can go to the last slide, which basically talks about, what's the future employment contract. And I welcome your views. I welcome your questions. And perhaps, I don't know how much time we have left, Anirvan, maybe 9 minutes or so, I think. Started it. Or are we up?
Yeah, no, we are on the clock, but I guess we can give a couple of minutes for questions or reflections.
Thank you. If there is a question, I don't see anything in the chat, do I? Oh, maybe there's some. Nope.
I'm just checking.
No, I can't see anything, so I assume everyone's asleep. I assume everyone's asleep. Didn't understand any of this. I apologize.
Yeah, no, I think I have a couple of questions. I always keep a couple of questions.
Maybe one, just to be efficient on time.
Yes. You've spoken about the talent recipe, and you talked about the different industries reacting differently, and let's say the startups have a certain talent recipe, whereas some of the more 20th century businesses have a different talent recipe. And we're talking about this, not even evolution, a revolution taking place. In your mind, when do you think the companies who have not yet started down that path of recognizing that the talent recipe needs to change, what's your thought on the horizon? Are we talking a couple of years? Are we talking 10 years, 5 years? Any thoughts on that?
It's already happening, and COVID is going to make it very clear who the progressive experimentators were in the 5 years before the pandemic, and who sat on their haunches waiting for someone else to make all the mistakes, and then they would follow. And unfortunately, the bridge collapsed. So the people on the other side will survive. The people who were waiting for evidence that the bridge was safe and didn't want to take the risks will suffer. And many businesses will go under in the next 5 years, purely because their economics are just not tuned in to disruptors that can come in and eat their lunch. And remember, we haven't had time to even discuss industry convergence or industry expansion. The ability for Amazon to go into 50 industries once they have customer data. Nothing stops them. Or Alibaba to sort of take over digital commerce in all of China, because it knows every Chinese, down to their eating habits today, and so on. So, we're not even going there because we don't have time. There is a hypothesis on that. But the reality is the next 10 years are going to be quite dramatic. And you should aim to work for, in whatever shape or form, an organization that is inventing itself, reinventing itself for the future, and not sitting on its haunches, on past glory, or depleting its brand by just sticking to, what they've done in the past. That's going to be very, very dangerous, I think, for your choice.
Yeah, no, absolutely agreed. There are a couple of reflections that people had said. So Chris Gunning mentioned about wise men once told me bots don't change processes, people do. And then there's another one from Marielle van der Forst. Seems like human beings need to become smarter over time as well, since jobs are changing.
Yes. No, absolutely. That's the hypothesis that we need to be smarter. I don't think we need to, the DNA is the DNA. We're very smart. We're creative. There are things we can do the machines can't. We have to really focus our energies on, sharpening functions to construct a capability, a choice out of, or to architect from. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I don't want to take up time from Sandra. I know she's waiting. So let's stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Gyan, so much. Again, very insightful. And for those of you who are in the audience who may want to get in touch with Gyan, please follow us on the LinkedIn page. We will ensure that if anybody wants to speak with Gyan, we'll facilitate that discussion. So thank you again, Gyan.
Thank you. Cheers.